Hello and welcome to Above the Curve. I'm your host, Andrew Shrout. I am here with Todd Anderson.
What's up, guys?
And Brad Nelson.
I am very illustrious.
Brad Nelson, the illustrious.
Yes,
Brad Nelson.
Brad?
My two illustrious teammates, in fact.
Yeah, that is true. We ended up playing in the Classic this weekend, and I won't lie, I was dead weight for most of it.
The Team Seal Classic here in Roanoke. We finished second.
Womp womp.
Yeah, we couldn't close. Well, I did my part anyway.
He did a lot of work.
Shroud only
actually.
lost one match all day. I think I was batting just over 50% or something.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I had the best deck by far with like Foil Stormbreath Dragon and Man Accelerants and a bunch of removal. Just a good green-red monsters deck, but in limited. And I still only won like 2/3 of my matches.
Shroud just picked people apart with a Servant of Timurat.
That is true. Yep, everyone else was trying to figure out how they can win the game. I was just trying to figure out how I could tap Servant of Timurat.
Yeah.
Just as many ways. Retraction Helix, Triton's Tactics, Bounce that, Breaching Hippocamp, among
Oh, yeah.
Just
The deck was a piece of work, but it was enough to help me carry these guys.
I mean, yeah, I mean, he carried us right over the finish line to make the finals.
well, that's not the finish line.
I understand.
Yeah,
well, it's really close to the finish line, but I consider the finish line beating Frank Scarron, Alex Mazeltaz, and Gerard Fabiano, to be honest. We beat him in the top 4, and that was a tight match with
That is
all
true,
these
yeah.
limited Grand Prix titles amongst them. And
Yeah, that was a really close match, and definitely when it finally ended, and Alex showed his hand of lands, extended the hand, and we got to move on to the finals. I was like, woo, we pulled that one out.
yeah, it was scary.
And then we got to the draft and the finals.
I didn't really draft.
Was it?
so-
Was it? Wait. Was it Frank scary?
I apologize, Frank.
I feel like
I didn't scream that one.
I feel like that's a good place to just let's talk about the.
All right,
Yeah,
so-
I agree. Yeah, enough about us and our experience. We didn't even win the thing.
No.
There were a lot of tournaments this weekend, actually. We're going to the winter circle, and this is one of the biggest winter circles we've ever had. There are 8 total names.
He's ever had.
That's fair.
He's ever had.
All
We've
right.
had bigger.
Sure. Since I've been with the show, I have had winter circles with 2 and 3, but we got a big one for you. So buckle down for the winter circle. All right, enough of us tooting our own horns for finishing second in the tournament.
Who's tooting their own horns? I was talking about how bad I played. You're the one just talking about how amazing you
I
are.
honestly, I don't know. I would rather lose like 0-2 than lose the finals. So.
Well, that's just not true, because if that was the case, I would have never had an accomplishment in Magic.
All right, fair. So maybe I was tooting my own horn a little. I was just excited to be playing Magic again.
Oh
guys.
yeah,
Come on.
and you played
But-
very well, but 3 players did play
Yes,
a little bit better than us.
we did get thrashed in the finals by Danny Goldstein, Abe Stein, and Nate Sturm.
Congratulations and good games. I hold no grudges.
You
Indeed.
played better than us, and congratulations, but enjoy those
GGs,
plaques.
Good sirs. Danny Goldstein, a name you guys might recognize. He top-8'd Grand Prix Philadelphia just a few weeks ago. So
It's really odd how limited players continue to do well in
Yeah,
limited.
funny how that works, isn't it? So he's on a little bit of a tear, so congratulations to him, and congratulations to them, in fact. But enough about the Classic. There was an Open Series weekend this weekend.
And I feel like this was the first weekend of a new set of Magic
was.
cards.
It was. Journey into Nyx made its standard debut this weekend in Cincinnati. And that standard Open was won by one Andrew Tenjum.
Finally.
Finally, in fact.
Finally. He hasn't won yet. That was the first one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Andrew Tenjum he had previously top-8'd 6 standard and legacy Opens. This is his 7th, and I know he kind of felt the weight on his shoulders that he really needed to close and finally win one. So he picked up his first piece of hardware, so congratulations to him.
Yep.
And that was Saturday. On Sunday, we had our second European winner of a Star City Open.
Who was the first?
The first was Michael Bonda, who...
Oh, I know him.
Yeah.
He's a really good friend of mine.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
Yeah.
So yeah, he won last summer, won a standard Open, but this weekend, Pierre Nystrom, I think I said that right. Pierre Nystrom won the Legacy Open in Cincinnati with Death and Taxes.
Which, if you know Michael Bonde as a Death and Tax player, I feel a conspiracy from the European players
Right?
coming on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just connections everywhere.
Yeah, just that's what Europe does. Is they just
Yeah.
they sit on the other side of the pond and they plot to bring Death and Taxes to our tournaments.
Yeah.
Apparently, but it makes sense because every time they do really well with it.
This
So-
that would have been like a perfect spot for a joke about the Boston Tea Party if it was held in Boston. We're like, no new taxes. We just
Okay.
Sorry.
But
It would have if
Yeah.
like several different things had worked out, but
Sorry.
they didn't, Todd.
Yeah.
They didn't.
I just have one
You
thing.
don't always have all the pieces to the joke. You just got to make them up as you go.
I do want to say one thing. I'm really happy that Death and Taxes took down an open, mostly due to once True Name Nemesis came out, I always thought the deck wasn't going to be that good, and it had a lot of problems. I guess with True Name not being that popular right now because Delver's taking over the format, it's a great time to be a Death and Tax player. So I might even start playing that deck now because I'm going to be going to an open. And it's been one of my favorite decks, so I'm glad somebody has inspired me to play Death and Taxes once again.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm just glad Delver didn't win a tournament for the first time in
Right?
like 2 months or whatever.
Yeah,
so.
someone had to come from outside the country to fix our Delver problem.
Yeah.
So it was like we needed to call an exterminator. We had too many bugs flying around.
Yep.
Per Nystrom
good.
showed up. He's like, I got this, guys.
Yeah.
Yes, congratulations to him. And speaking of Europeans, actually, there was another rather large tournament, or a large series of tournaments across the pond. The Bazaar of Moxen was this weekend.
Yeah.
Now, for those who don't know what that is, this happens 3 times a year, I believe now. It's been up from 1 and then 2 over the years. But Bazaar of Moxen is a all weekend long collection of tournaments from the Eternal formats.
Yes.
So there's a vintage tournament, there's a modern tournament, and then there's a big legacy tournament to cap off the weekend.
Yeah, it's really awesome, and there's so many players that go to these things. They're very they're comparable to like open sizes. Like the legacy Moxen was like 500, 600 players.
Yep, we had 219, I think, for vintage, a little over 300 for
That's
modern,
actually pretty
and-
impressive for vintage because I mean you hear about like weekly vintage tournaments sometimes getting around like 20 to 30, 40 players, like sometimes even like 50, but to see over 200 players come together for one vintage event gives me a little hope that it's actually not a dead format. You
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
Well, I mean, it will never be dead, and Moto might bring it back, but I will say that the awkward thing about the format is, like, isn't 30 of the same cards in every single deck?
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow vintage that well, but apparently it's getting weird. The winner of the Bazaar of Moxen Vintage Tournament, Gwen de Champfalere, playing Tezzeret Oath. Now, I knew that Tezzeret was a deck, and I knew that Oath was a deck, but apparently you can just mash them up if you feel.
Well, I
I've
mean,
been doing
to be
that
fair,
standard for years.
I mean,
Sure.
all you have to do to play Tezzeret is play, Voltaic Key and Time Vault.
And just the Time Vault, actually.
And Tezzeret. Yeah, like one Tezzeret, one Time Vault, one Voltaic Key, and that's the package.
That's fair. And then just the Oath package is just 4 Oath and a big thing. I don't know what Tidespout Tyrant, I guess, is what they do now. So.
I don't know, Gristlebrand maybe.
Yeah.
I have no
There's
idea.
lots of stuff.
Let's just...
That is true. Yeah, vintage kind of outside my wheelhouse a little bit. But congratulations to Gwen de Champfalere there. The modern Bazaar of Moxen tournament won by Seraphine Wellinger playing White-Green Hate Bears.
I thought it was
modern Death and Taxes.
I thought it was a great deck choice, mostly for what the modern format looks like right now. I definitely was a huge Tarmo Twin fan, but right now I think there's a lot of like relics running around to where I don't really want to play that. So Splinter Twin's a good deck choice too, but that deck is just so good at disrupting opponents in the early game by just forcing them to pay mana if they want to fetch lands or more mana for Thalias, or like when they're trying to be a graveyard strategy of Scavenging Ooze. Along with like just having good removal spells and good early creatures, I think it's not just a joke deck. Like a lot of people consider it not that good because it's not doing something extremely powerful, but it's very good at stopping opponents from doing powerful things, especially in this metagame.
Sure, that deck's always kind of lurking on the fringes.
Yep.
It does relatively well for itself on Magic Online for sure. Now, the winner of the biggest tournament at the Bazaar of Moxen weekend, Nicholas Kronberger, took down the Legacy tournament playing 4-color Loam. This is a deck that I know you're kind of interested in.
I mean, I'm kind of interested in it until I realize that I don't know how to play it at all. And
Yeah, there's this thing
Okay.
about Legacy where if you've never played a deck before, it's really difficult to just pick it up and not make like 40 mistakes a game.
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces to this Nicholas Kronberger.
And it
Loam
also
deck.
seems like really boring, kind of like a Nicolas Cage movie. Like you're always like interested in the preview, and then the moment you sit down in the theater, you're just like, I should not have done this.
Yeah, then
And
then
that's-
Nicolas Cage just like kind of looks at the screen and points like this, and then you just zone out.
All right.
Yeah.
Legacy Loam decks are like a Nicolas Cage movie. You guys heard it here first.
Except for Con Air. Con Air was sweet.
Con Air was sweet. Let's bring it back. Let's get back to Standard. We gotta focus on the debut of Journey into Nyx for Standard. Let's talk about the deck that Andrew Tenjum used to win the Standard Open in the Breakdown. I know a lot of people were hoping that Standard was going to break out of this Black Devotion stranglehold that it's been in, and it sort of did.
By splashing the last color it needed to splash?
Yeah, it added its fourth variation.
Yep.
Andrew Tenjum had something to say about this whole diversity in Standard thing. Todd, what do you think about this deck?
Well, I actually wrote about Black Green Devotion in my article this week. If you go back to Wednesday, you can see me talk about all my changes I would make to the deck. But I'll give you guys a little bit here now too. So when the new set came out, Journey into Nyx, I thought that maybe Pack Rat would get a little worse. If people were going really fast with Mana Confluence, I think Pack Rat is just not nearly as good because a lot of times your game plan is just cast Pack Rat on turn 2 and then just make Pack Rats for the rest of the game. But if your opponent starts off with a 2-power 1 drop into like a 3-power 2 drop, a lot of times you're just going to get run over and you're actually just forced to chump block with Pack Rat or like try to trade Pack Rats off for other creatures. With that said though, I mean, clearly the top 8 was not very aggressive. We had a lot of control decks, I think three different control decks, a mono black deck, black green control, a green red monsters, and a couple other things. And Pack Rat just felt like it was very good in most of those matchups. Now, against decks with things like Detention Sphere and Supreme Verdict, it's not nearly as great, but you have so much dead removal in your deck that being able to turn those into actual threats, especially later on in the game when it's like this grind fest, is really important, and I think that's one of the reasons why Pack Rat did so well in this tournament. I feel like almost every round on coverage there was like a blue-white X deck versus something else, and I just felt like Tenjum just picked it perfect, like the black decks have all the tools to beat the aggressive decks if they draw well, and they have all the tools to beat the control decks if they draw well, and he drew pretty well and played pretty well and took home the trophy, like congrats to him.
Brad, have you
I've never been more bored listening to Todd talk in my life, and that's not your fault.
That's not true.
That's Pack Rat's fault, and I am so sick of hearing about this card. And I'm going to do everything in my power to stop Standard looking like this because, like, I was so excited.
Homing lightning.
I was so excited about Journey to Nyx, and when the open results came in, I was just like, this looks like last week, and the week before that, and the week before that, and the week before that, and it's just spiraling out of control. And I really don't understand why there isn't anything new or innovative, especially when this set does have a lot of sweet cards. Maybe what I'm thinking about is people did play cards like Mana Confluence, but we don't see, 17th through 500th place, so we don't know if there was a ton of like mono red that beat them out, and then like the mid-range and control decks beat those out. Like it would have been great to just have the top 200 deck list to actually understand how the tournament like unfolded. But from what information we have, it seems like either no one played Mana Confluence decks or they weren't that good. And from my personal experience, I actually am like just not losing any games with Brave Naya, which is a 3-color variant with Mana Confluence. So I still think that there should be a deck like that. Like I just do.
Well, and one of the concessions that Andrew Tenjum made was in order to fit Abrupt Decay into his deck, he's not playing Bile Blight, which that would be one of the biggest tools against aggro decks.
Well, I actually thought that was like kind of a pretty big mistake. I talked about it a little bit in my article, but basically I think that Devour Flesh is in a really weird spot right now. Like, obviously you want some outs if your opponent does have Blood Baron and Viscopa, but if you just look at the top 8, there's no Blood Barons. Like, there's no reason to really, like, have Devour Flesh instead of Bile Blight, other than, like, you're just afraid of, like, the Hexproof deck, which, may have actually had a pretty big jump in popularity thanks to Mana Confluence, and I forgot the name of the new, like, Archer guy, the 2/1 Reach Hexproof from the new set.
Archer.
I'm actually going to thank literally every single, like, writer of Magic content, because everyone had a hexproof list. So like Tenjum was probably sitting at home saying every single person has wrote an article about Naya hexproof. People are probably going to play this deck because it's sweet, it's fun. People loved hexproof last year. Yeah. So like I would have not come into this tournament with mono black without 4 Devour Flesh.
Like, I mean, maybe I'm just wrong. I feel like, okay, so I mean, obviously I'm being results oriented, like I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective, and to me, Bile Blight looks a lot better against all the decks that were in the top 8 than the Devour Flesh, like simply because, like, how do you beat an opposing Pack Rat? Like you have to try to 1-for-1 to death, and that's just not a place where I ever want to be in the mirror match.
Not anymore, yeah.
Yeah, like when you have the tools at your disposal to come back from a Pack Rat, and you don't play them, like I feel like that's just a mistake.
I mean, you also probably thought there was going to be less mono black. Still some in the format, but not a ton. And I've seen BioBlade. It's not that impressive a card outside of the mirror, and it's not even that impressive.
I mean, it's insane against mono blue. It's really good against like mono red, like mono white aggro. Like obviously it's an anti-aggressive card, but at the same time, like it's just one of your best removal spells in mono against mono blue and mono black. Which
that's true, but all I know is I played mono black, and I love sacking me some demons and gaining 7 life sometimes. So.
Yeah, it's a weird concession that they have to make, and I think that a lot of times these black decks have made this concession to try and prepare for the aggro decks that they expected. You mentioned everyone was talking about hexproof, but the metagame that we saw in Cincinnati was not even remotely what everyone expected to see based on kind of the hype and the discussion leading into that tournament. So in this next segment, we're going to talk about what was expected and what actually happened. And Mana Confluence is actually the big card that people thought was going to show up and just didn't at all.
Yep.
So let's talk about Mana Confluence next in the Soapbox. Mana Confluence was supposed to unlock all the decks and change the face of Standard. Maybe it still will, but why didn't it this week?
Well, I never thought it was actually just going to change everything. Like I said, I wanted it to be in 3-color aggressive decks that knew how to close games, but it wouldn't really go into any of the other decks. And I never really liked it in the 2-color mutable decks. But once I started testing like Brave Naya with it, I was just instantly hooked. My mana is just perfect. I get to play 1/2/3 drop. And I have all of these different unique combat tricks and ways to close out the games that are very mana intensive in the early game. Like a lot of times I'm going to want to, cast green, red, red, white on turn 4 or green, red, white on turn 3. And I need Mana Confluence to always fix that. I played it at like F&M and just like casually with some friends and even in versus videos. And the deck just felt very good and very powerful, even if I wasn't like had a fully, tuned deck list. So I'm just curious why there aren't other hyper aggressive decks running Mana Confluence, because you're not getting that punished by the other decks. Who's really going at your throat in Standard right now? There's not really any deck. And Mono Black can't really punish you for taking 4 to 5 points of damage during a game. They probably were going to be able to deal that damage easily anyway. So I'm under the impression that maybe I don't think like there was enough card availability right away, and so like there were people playing Mana Confluence, but we just didn't see them because the numbers were lower than they should have been. But I mean, I know that I'm going to, put 4 Mana Confluence in the top 16 of Knoxville this weekend. I'm just hoping there's a couple other people that do
top
it too.
16.
That's a weak call shot.
Yeah, that's pretty weak.
I'm saying that there's going to be 4 Mana Confluence in the top 16. That's a deck. Fine. I'll take 5th.
That's still kind of weak, honestly. But okay.
How is that weak? It's going to be like 600 people.
Sure. No, I mean, I get that it's realistic and all,
Yeah.
but I mean, who calls a shot and then doesn't claim first? I mean, come on, Brad.
Well, realistic people.
That's a pretty good point.
That's fair. Todd, what's your take on all this?
All right, so I actually have a few ideas of why I think Mana Confluence possibly didn't, bust into the top 16 of the last Open. I think there's a lot to say about when new decks come out, especially decks that seem like they should be more complex. People don't actually build them correctly. If people were playing like 2-color decks and they start to delve into 3-color aggressive decks because of Mana Confluence, there's a very good chance that they're just not like building their curve correctly. They're not hitting like the right threats in their deck, and maybe even they're not even playing the right removal. I saw a lot of really hyper aggressive like black-based decks that were playing Thoughtseize in their deck, and I just feel like when you're taking 5 points of shock / Mana Confluence damage a game, playing something like Thoughtseize in your main deck is a huge liability. And when you start to see things like that, you just have to wonder like what else went wrong. I think that there's a lot to say about like which color combination is correct for being the most hyper aggressive version of a deck. And the fact that we have such good mana with Ravnica Shocklands, now Mana Confluence, and even some number of temples, there's just so much you can do, and I don't think we had anybody really just knock it out of the park. I think people really just like staying, like safe, comfortable. They like playing their control decks. They like playing their mid-range decks, and we just saw people, instead of trying to innovate and do something like really cool and new, they instead just opted to play something that was a little more safe. It was pretty obvious that Black Devotion could splash green very easily for Abrupt Decay now that we have Temple of Malady, and I think that like that deck is obviously just still very powerful. So there's a lot of different direction you can go with Mana Confluence, but I just don't think anybody did it just right.
I did it just right.
Did you? Because you didn't go.
Well, I didn't go because I had to, hold up you two and the team sealed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to give actually a quick shout out to James Grendel, who snuck into the top 16 at 16th place, playing green-white aggro.
With 4 Mana Confluence,
Yes, a deck near and dear to my heart with 4 Mana Confluence and 4 Temple Garden and 4 Temple of Plenty. So the full-blown 12 dual lands, which I think the deck needs.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So there's at least one subtle appearance of Mana Confluence.
Yeah, I mean, and that was a deck that
It's just eking on the edge. It's like, let me in. Let me in.
Yeah, well, it might show up later.
Yeah, like I like green-white, and I used to like it a lot a couple months back, but the mana was always a big concern for the deck. But once I start building the Selesnya decks, I realized that Selesnya can just splash Naya, and it's like the same mana. It's exactly the same mana, but it just like gets a free roll for cards like Boros Charm or Gore-Clan Rampager, and you don't, I'd rather play Gore-Clan over Advent of the Worm, to be honest. Like, I don't really see.
Oof.
Oh, what?
Those are fighting words.
Are those fighting words?
Advent of the Worm is me and Advent of the Worm, we're boys. All right?
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that card. Gore-Clan
What,
Rampager, pretty
you
sweet
also
card, too.
like
Yeah.
digging underground?
I don't know what he's
Because
getting at.
they're worms.
Oh, Todd, come on, man.
Yeah, you got to work on your jokes today. They're pretty bad.
All right, so that's how we feel about Mana Confluence. We want to know how you guys feel. Is it overrated? Is it underrated? Is it correctly rated?
Will I not take 5th place?
Will he take 3rd place, perhaps?
Will I take 303rd place?
Just as likely.
Yeah.
Talk back to us in the comments. Let us know what you guys think. The Star City Games Open Series comes to Knoxville this weekend. Be there if you can, but if you can't, Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, and Nick Miller will be bringing you all the coverage on SCG Live. As for us, though, we are all curved out. For Brad and Todd, I'm Andrew Shrout. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to Above the Curve. I'm your host, Andrew Shrout. I am here with the illustrious Todd Anderson.
What's up, guys?
And the almost as illustrious Brad Nelson.
Womp womp. Well, oh, hi. I mean, I don't know. Is that a good intro for me? I have no idea.
No, womp womp's like perfect. I don't know what you're waiting on.
All right, we're running. Yeah, no, you're
I would have
sorry.
kept going.
I was just
We
like,
should still keep going.
No,
okay.
not.
What's
What's his face?
Who are we talking about?
Exactly.
The current vice president. Anyway,
Oh, Joe Biden?
ident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He got that from Thassa.
Yeah.
Let me-